In the 1920s, Nicholas Roerich, a Russian painter, philosopher, and archaeologist, embarked on an expedition along with several others in search of the lost mystical city of Shambhala. Known as the place of 1,000 names, Shambhala is a mysterious, technologically and spiritually advanced city where Tibetan kings and enlightened individuals dwell. Also known as Shangri-La or Agartha, the name Shambhala roughly translates to place of peace or place of tranquility. Aside from vague descriptions of its entrance being somewhere in the Himalayas and that the city itself lay deep inside the earth, its true geographical location is still a mystery to this day. It is said that the inhabitants of Shambhala once enjoyed a peaceful golden age above ground. That was until some 5,000 years ago, at the onset of the present dark age known in Hinduism as the Kali Yuga, that they were driven underground, possibly by a global cataclysm. While many modern Buddhists today believe that Shambhala is only accessible through the mind by achieving enlightenment, the Roerichs, among many other occultists and mystics of the early 20th century, believe that it indeed was a real place that anyone could travel to. As we dig deeper into the lore of this place, we'll find that there's good reason to think that it actually is, and that he may actually have found the Inner Earth City. Born in St. Petersburg in 1874, Nicholas Roerich was a prominent public figure in pre-revolutionary Russia. Studying at the Imperial Academy of Arts in 1893, he became absorbed in the studies of Eastern philosophy, archaeology, and the arts. He was a prolific artist, creating over 7,000 pieces of artwork including paintings, mosaics, murals, and sketches. Ominously predicting the coming world war that would devastate Europe, in the late 1930s he painted Armageddon. This painting depicts droves of people fleeing a city engulfed in flames. Among other prophetic works, such as the Second Armageddon and Messenger from the Himalayas, the messenger here seems to subtly suggest where the warnings of the looming Dark Age were coming from. In Cry of the Serpent, Roerich didn't know until many years later that he had illustrated an Eastern legend which tells that the serpent utters a cry of warning when its country is in danger of destruction. What is more, his paintings from his expeditions beautifully encapsulate the ethereal and mystical aura that is felt in the Himalayas, expressing the innate spiritual quality of nature. It was during this time that he became deeply curious about the esoteric teachings in theosophy and Tibetan Buddhism, and alongside his wife, they became immersed in the idea of the mystical kingdom of Shambhala. Of these ancient teachings would have been the Kalachakra Tantra, which is the group of texts that contains the most writings on the mystical city. In the fall of 1920, Nicholas and his wife moved to New York, and he gained some popularity there as a sort of spiritual guru. Tibetan prayer robes became his daily attire, and it was around this time that their school of mysticism was founded. He eventually attracted the attention of some wealthy American bureaucrats, one of them being Henry Wallace, the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture under the Roosevelt administration. Wallace grew quite fond of Roerich, going so far as to calling him his personal guru. Moreover, he remains an important figure in the story as he plays a key role in helping Roerich with his expedition to Inner Mongolia. After all, they would need all the help they could get for the intense journey that lay ahead. Nicholas's wife, Helena Roerich, a renowned writer and philosopher, had translated H.P. Blavatsky's controversial esoteric work titled The Secret Doctrine, which presented Shambhala as being a gateway to enlightenment. It was through these theosophical teachings that they became even more interested, and the Roerichs became utterly convinced of the literal existence of Shambhala. At some point, while living in New York, Helena received telepathic instructions from Master Morya, a supernatural entity, which was so compelling that the couple decided to leave the US and seek the city for themselves. Unfortunately for the Roerichs, the area they aimed to investigate was all but inaccessible in the early 20th century. Tibet was closed to foreigners, and the area was hotly contested between the Soviets, British, Chinese, Japanese, and Mongolian armies. Spies, rebels, and rogue warlords clashed daily in the mountain passes, making the expedition extremely hazardous. If they were going to pull this off, they would need the help of some powerful people. It all started in Sikkim. Here, the Roerichs began their first Asian expedition of 1925, and for the next 5 years they would traverse remote areas in northeastern India, through the Karakoram Mountains bordering China, India, and Pakistan, eventually passing through the southwestern Chinese villages of Khotan and Kashgar, among many others along the way. They spent a considerable amount of time in the Altai Mountains, the central Gobi Desert, ultimately arriving in Tibet. This monumental expedition would cover no less than 25,000 kilometers of uncharted territory. It was also reported that they took a detour to stop in Moscow in 1926, although the exact reason for this is unknown. It's possible that in order to get the special permissions to freely travel in some of these areas, his party might have been engaged in some kind of espionage, and that they might have gone to Moscow to deliver some information. Adding to the suspicions of espionage, Nicholas Roerich's son George kept an extensive travel diary which included very detailed information about the Japanese military transportation system, along with the locations and movement of Japanese troops. Their search for Shambhala would be no small feat. They would go through 35 mountain passes, cross the Gobi Desert, and chart dozens of alpine peaks for the first time. And from the beginning, they had to bear with extreme weather, local rebel factions, wandering thieves, and poisonous grass which took their horses down. The road was littered with the skeletons of donkeys, mules, and yaks. And if all this wasn't enough, they also suffered from mountain blindness, and their food supplies became very scarce. It was on this expedition that Nicholas and his team reported seeing something very strange. One morning, while still at their camp in the Kukanor district, they witnessed some kind of a shiny metallic oval hovering above the mountains and disappearing into the sky at great speeds. They even had enough time to get out their binoculars to get a closer look, and confirmed its large oval shape, with one side brightly reflecting the sunlight. What makes this entry even more interesting is that UFO sightings weren't of public interest at this time, and wouldn't become common for a few more decades until the mid to late 20th century. As many ancient legends claim that the city of Shambhala enjoys a high level of technological advancement, could this have been a clue that the entrance to Shambhala was nearby? It is said that the closer one gets to the mythical, inner-earth city, the more vague their thoughts become, as the essence of Shambhala transcends the limitations of language. Nicholas documented his journey in several different travel diaries, one for empirical observations, and the other for the more esoteric ideas and mystical experiences he had. In his esoteric book, Shambhala the Resplendent, Nicholas began charting another journey written in stories and riddles. As they trekked deeper into the Tibetan plateau, he increasingly recorded strange manifestations, fires, lights, and visions over their camp. Feeling as though he was being guided by some mystical force, his paintings took on a much stranger tone as well, including more and more illustrations of the messianic king of Shambhala. It was shortly after these strange encounters that Nicholas and his crew disappeared off the map for an entire year, despite being monitored closely by most of the major powers of the time. This is the part that really fuels the conspiracy theories, as things just so happen to go dark shortly after the story takes the strangest turns. So what happened in this year of disappearance? We may never truly know, but there are two separate entries in his travel diary that can help piece together a portion of this mystery. First, it mentions that they dealt with violent conflicts with the Tibetan military, and quite tragically, that they spent the last 5 months of their disappearance in the Tibetan government's detainment camp. Upon their release, he wrote that, "Only the superiority of our firearms prevented bloodshed. In spite of our having Tibet passports, the expedition was forcibly stopped by Tibetan authorities. Due to the harsh conditions in this camp, 5 members of the expedition did not survive." While that answers part of the question, that still leaves an entire 7 months unaccounted for, and whether or not Nicholas Roerich actually succeeded in finding the Inner Earth City is still a subject of debate. While his mission seems like it was unsuccessful, there is legitimate reason to think that he could have visited Shambhala during those 7 months. As we'll see, this next journal entry is pretty compelling. The second and only other source we have on what happened during this time didn't become public until sometime after the expedition. In his journal, we can find a very peculiar entry that he recorded while passing through the remote valley of Uman. It states that a monk led them into some kind of an old monastery where a large cave opening was purposely blocked by heavy stones. The monk proudly told them that this was a holy entrance to the inner earth kingdom of Shambhala, but barred them from entry. He assured them that the kings of Shambhala would return one day, but until then, humanity would only hear the echoes of their chanting. One very ancient Buddhist prophecy found in the Kalachakra Tantra warns us that when the world declines into war and greed and all is lost, the king Maitreya will emerge from Shambhala with a huge army to vanquish the dark forces and usher in a worldwide golden age. This war, whether to be interpreted literally or metaphorically, will mark the end of the Kali Yuga and the beginning of the 10,000-year golden age known as the Satya Yuga. During this time, humanity will be pure and devoid of wickedness. According to the prophecy, the final battle is said to take place in the year 2424. There is yet another strange aspect of this story to ponder. During the year he disappeared, Nicholas Roerich was believed to have come in contact with a mysterious mythical object known as the Chintamani stone. This is believed by many occultists to be a magical, wish-granting stone that came to Earth on an asteroid from the constellation of Orion. Physically, it takes on the shape of a trapezohedron and is believed to be made of moldavite. Upon returning to the United States, after seemingly having failed the mission as far as the public was concerned, their allies in the US government didn't hold it against them. In fact, they were apparently so pleased with its outcome that the Roerichs kept in touch with Franklin Delano Roosevelt. A couple years later, it would be that same administration that would fund the Roerichs' second expedition to Asia in 1933. According to their American sponsors, the official purpose of this mission would be to conduct scientific research on drought-resistant wheat strains, and George Roerich, Nicholas's son, being an avid Tibetologist, would also convince them to investigate the medicinal properties of Mongolian and Tibetan herbs found in the region. I think most would agree that to the Roerichs, while needing the funding and logistical help from the US government, both of these reasons would have been a cover-up for their true motives behind the expedition. It was at some point later on during this second expedition in search of Shambhala that, yet again, Nicholas Roerich and his party disappeared for a number of months. This time, there is zero record of their activities in the Himalayas. It was some time after departing Peking to spend the winter somewhere in Tibet that a 3-month gap occurs in the story, where no one knows what they did, despite being monitored by nearly all of the major intelligence agencies. By March 1935, they once again resurfaced in Peking, this time with almost 300 species of drought-resistant plants, medicinal herbs, and many significant ancient Tibetan manuscripts. Roerich also gathered a lot of material on the myths and legends of the East. He wrote, quote,
"In every city and each encampment of Asia, I tried to unveil what memories were cherished in the folk memory. Through these guarded and preserved tales, you may recognize the reality of the past. In each spark of folklore, there is a drop of great truth."
We may never know if Nicholas Roerich actually succeeded in visiting Shambhala. However, I do believe that, conspiracy theories aside, the Roerichs should be remembered for all of the influential work they did. Honestly, I'm quite amazed that there hasn't been a movie made about them yet. Over the course of their careers, they founded several different schools, institutions, and research centers. They both sought to bridge the divide between warring countries, working towards solutions to bringing peace among nations. They held a profound reverence for the artistic and cultural heritage of the world, and affirmed that the preservation of ancient artifacts and historical monuments is of crucial importance. All of this work resulted in Nicholas Roerich receiving 3 nominations for the Nobel Peace Prize, and the United States among 20 other nations signing the Roerich Pact in 1935. This was the first international treaty signed in the Oval Office, which legally recognizes that the defense of cultural objects and the preservation of culture should always take precedence over military necessity. As for the elusive lost city of Shambhala, for now its secrets remain hidden in the subterranean depths of the Hollow Earth, patiently awaiting the next seeker of mystical truth.